Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Do Hongyu. Coming up in this edition, the U.S. Republican National Convention in Milwaukee has nominated Donald Trump as the party's candidate just 2 days after an assassination attempt on him in Pennsylvania. Hunger is looming over South Sudan as tensions flare up in parts of the African nation. And flash floods have killed at least 35 people in eastern Afghanistan. We begin in North America. The U.S. Republican National Convention has opened on schedule in Milwaukee. It took place just 2 days after a gunman tried to assassinate Donald Trump at a rally in Pennsylvania. The RNC delegates voted to make Donald Trump the party's nominee. Meantime, the former U.S. president has picked Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate. Interestingly, Vance used to be a vocal critic of Donald Trump. Hendrik Sibrandy has more from the convention.
We are at Fiserv Forum in Milwaukee, the site of the Republican National Convention. This is day one of the convention. The roll call has just finished up here. Mr. Trump made a major announcement on this Monday. He decided that Ohio Senator J.D. Vance will be his selection to be his running mate, to be the future vice president of the United States if voters approve the Trump-Vance ticket in November. Vance is a 39-year-old senator from Ohio. He has come a long way politically. A number of years ago, he was very critical of Donald Trump, wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy, which became very popular, describing poverty in the Appalachian section of the United States. Well, in the years since then, Vance is fully on board the Trump train, so to speak, very supportive of the former president, shares many of his opinions, both on foreign policy and in terms of trade, and he's expected to be a very vigorous and very aggressive advocate for Trump on the campaign trail this coming fall, with just 100-plus days left in this particular campaign heading to the November election. So Trump made that announcement on Truth Social. At the same time, a Florida judge handed him a major victory. Judge Eileen Cannon threw out the classified documents case against Trump, one of the 4 criminal cases that Trump was still facing. Cannon said that the appointment of Special Prosecutor Jack Smith had been unconstitutional and basically threw the entire case out. Smith has indicated he plans to file an appeal, so it's not clear that this case is completely over just yet. And in fact, Trump called for all of his cases to be dismissed. That may be a bit optimistic, but certainly this one, in which he's suspected of taking classified documents from the White House and not complying with any kind of efforts to get those documents returned, that case is completely gone and has been thrown out. And certainly that is a further boost to him as we head into the nomination for Trump and J.D. Vance coming here in Milwaukee in a couple of days. In Milwaukee.
That was Hendrik Sibrandy on the U.S. Republican National Convention. Meantime, the FBI is still trying to determine a motive behind the attempt on Trump's life. The 20-year-old, whom authorities say carried out the attack, is believed to have acted alone with his father's gun. Addressing the nation after the incident, President Joe Biden called for lowering the current political temperature. Nathan King reports from Washington.
While the US and the world knows what happened on Saturday, former US President Trump nearly assassinated, the big question now is why and how. Well, big search continues around the home, of course, of Thomas Matthew Crooks. The 20-year-old is a recent graduate with a degree in engineering. According to law enforcement, he does not seem to have had any mental health problems. They have been searching his house in the town of Bethel, seen here in Pennsylvania, about an hour away from the scene of the shooting. Now, this alleged gunman, of course, no motive yet. We understand he was a registered Republican, but did give money to progressive causes as well. Obviously, the town is shocked. The college where he'd just recently graduated is cooperating. They have found ammunition and other things in his house, but no motive as yet. And this is quite incredible considering the severity of what happened. Now, of course, lots of questions about the investigation, the FBI, Secret Service, other agencies involved, and a lot of criticism at the Secret Service over the weekend. They had a small perimeter around where Trump was nearly gunned down. Now, of course, the US President Joe Biden has promised to share any results of an investigation with the American public, partly to damp, I think, conspiracy theories.
I want to speak to what we do know. A former president was shot, an American citizen killed, while simply exercising his freedom to support the candidate of his choosing. We cannot, we must not go down this road in America.
That call for unity also being echoed by the Trump campaign. There's a real feeling across the political spectrum that this is the time perhaps for divided political leadership to show that political violence is not the way. Meanwhile, lots of concern coming in from world leaders and President Zelensky of Ukraine saying such violence has no justification in the world. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said he condemns the attempt and wished Trump a speedy recovery. French President Emmanuel Macron says the shooting was a tragedy for our democracies. The new UK Prime Minister also, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, said political violence should never be acceptable. Now, while of course these are messages of support for the United States, there is real worry around the world that political violence and the divided political system may have global repercussions come November.
That was Nathan King on the aftermath of an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Turning to Africa, hunger is looming over South Sudan as tensions flare up in parts of the African nation. Officials are blaming renewed hostilities in the Greater Peber Administrative Area for acute food shortages that have killed at least a dozen people. Worsening security situations are also severely curtailing local farming activity and delivery of humanitarian aid. Patrick Oyet reports from Juba.
Authorities in the Greater Peber Administrative Area say getting food in the area has become more difficult due to violence, which does not allow residents to cultivate. Fighting between the residents of the area and a neighboring community has blocked the only route that could be used to supply food in Greater Peber Administrative Area. Getting food to the area is normally only possible during the dry season. However, not many supplies got to the area during the last dry season due to conflict, and it is now the rainy season. Drought in the region last season negatively affected farming in the area. The Greater Peber Administrative Area borders Ethiopia, but it has no road connecting it to Ethiopia. The local government says it is now negotiating with neighboring local governments to find ways of getting food supplies to the Greater Peber Administrative Area.
That was Patrick Oyet on a hunger crisis unfolding in South Sudan. In the Middle East, Hamas says more than 320 Palestinians have been killed or injured in Gaza in the past 2 days. It's also accused Israel of using internationally prohibited weapons. The Israeli military says its forces have struck dozens of Palestinian military targets and have also killed gunmen in Rafah and central Gaza, sometimes in close combat. Akram al-Satari has more from Gaza.
Those latest attacks was taking place in different parts of the Gaza Strip, and they were indicating that the Israeli army and the Israeli political level have already decided to intensify the targeting and also to include more areas. According to the UNRWA, 190 UNRWA facilities were targeted during the 9 months of war, and the most recent attacks were also showing how difficult the situation is for the internally displaced people and for the UNRWA staff who are working on the ground and for the people who are working in the displacement encampments. One more UNRWA school was targeted by the Israeli occupation forces in Al-Rimal neighborhood in Gaza City, where one Palestinian internally displaced person was killed and 8 others were injured, and those are initial news, and the number of people who are killed and injured is expected to increase. The situation is extremely dire. The Israeli occupation forces have been targeting different areas. Some of those areas are medical healthcare centers and UNRWA shelters, and also facilities that were supposed to be providing people with water and with decent cooked food. Because of the very critical situation they have been living in, it's likely that this situation would continue. A school was targeted, this Al-Mawasi area was targeted, and around 80 Palestinians were killed. People are still killed, injured, and it looks like there is no immunity for any shelter that is designated as a shelter, either according to the Israel itself or according to international dictates and charters.
That was Al-Karam al-Satari reporting. Still in Gaza, the UN Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory has visited Nasser Hospital in Han Yunis. Scott Anderson's visit follows an Israeli strike in the Israel-declared safe zone of Mawasi. He describes the situation at the hospital as some of the most horrific scenes he's seen in the 9 months he's been in Gaza.
The air was filled with the smell of blood, and one health worker was mopping up pools of blood on the floor using only water, because there aren't sufficient supplies of disinfectant material or other cleaning supplies to stop the spread of infection. There's not enough beds, hygiene supplies, sheeting, mattresses, or scrubs, and many patients were treated on the ground or on waiting room benches without disinfectant. And this puts even treatable injuries at risk of sepsis and much more significant complications. Ventilator systems were not working due to electrical problems. And as I walked through the hospital and talked to families and children, we saw toddlers who were double amputees, children paralyzed and unable to receive treatment because they don't have the equipment at the hospital. One mother I talked to told me that she was told to move to Rafah because it would be safe there. And then she was told to move to Mawasi because it would be safe there. And unfortunately for her and her family, that was not true. And I think the words of this mother are a reminder that nowhere is safe in Gaza and no one is safe in Gaza. And what's urgently needed is a complete ceasefire for all parties to the conflict to protect the civilians wherever they are.
Mawasi shelters hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who fled to the area after Israel declared it a safe zone. And finally, in Asia, flash floods have killed at least 35 people in eastern Afghanistan. They also disrupted electricity and telecommunications. The country's farming industry is taking a hit as local residents have lost livestock and crops to the deluge. Smeria Amberson has details from Kabul.
According to police, dozens of bodies were recovered in Kod and Surkhod districts of eastern Nangarhar province following heavy rains and flooding. More than 230 people sought treatment at local facilities. Officials with the health ministry confirmed that some are in critical condition. I spoke with some locals who told me that 11 members of one family, including women and children, were found dead as flood swept through homes in Mastikhel. The rescue operation is continuing. Local sources confirmed that electricity, telecommunications and transportation systems were affected in many areas. Many have lost livestock and crops. Zabiullah Mujahid, the chief spokesperson for the Taliban-led government, said authorities were providing emergency supplies. Afghanistan is already facing political and economic challenges. Add to that now, this natural disaster affecting thousands of people, whether forecasters are predicting severe rainfall in at least 12 provinces of the country, including the capital, which could bring more flooding and destruction.
That was Marialai Amberson on the severe flooding in Afghanistan. Before we go, here's a recap of today's top stories. The U.S. Republican National Convention in Milwaukee has nominated Donald Trump as the party's candidate just 2 days after an assassination attempt on him in Pennsylvania. Hunger is looming over South Sudan as tensions flare up in parts of the African nation. And flash floods have killed at least 35 people in eastern Afghanistan. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports, and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Do Hongyu. Thank you for listening.